Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the In the 11 podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Griffiths, and this is the show where we bring on those from the world of football to show you what it takes to be in the 11 at the highest possible level. This week's guest to step into the 11 is Sam Agosti. The former Santa Clara player has a story probably that a lot of you out there can resonate with. A college career that, took place at a great program like Santa Clara, but maybe he didn't have the biggest, most successful collegiate career from a team standpoint or from a personal standpoint. And there wasn't a huge amount of buzz and around his name coming out of college, and still loved the game and still had a desire to keep pushing to the highest level that he possibly could. Knew that he didn't want his career to end once he finished his last collegiate season. So found a way to make it work. And we talk all about that, how he made his way over to Sweden, what's it like for him now being in Portugal. And I think it's a really good one, like I said, for those of you who may be in a similar situation where you've had a college career and it's been good, but maybe it hasn't been great. And maybe it hasn't been that springboard that you needed to get yourself to the next level. And not to say that Sam didn't have success at the college level, but he had to go and make his own path after he graduated and figure out a way to kind of keep chasing this professional dream. So I won't bore you with any more of my voice here at the top, but get you right in to be able to hear the rest of myself and Sam's conversation. And here is that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, joining us now from Portugal, Sam Agosti has stepped into the 11. And really appreciate his time. Looking forward to hearing his story. Sam, thanks so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So as we were just talking a little bit there before we kind of started recording, what's it been like for you so far having these experiences in Europe and playing overseas? I'm always curious to hear players if it like this has always been their dream, or if a little bit this is kind of like realizing something that's completely unique and special for them.
It's been my dream for a couple years. I wouldn't say always. So when I was thinking about college, one of the early questions I asked, even in the recruiting phase, was, "Will I be able to do a study abroad?" And the answer was pretty much no. Like the time when you would go do that, that's our season, and so if you choose to study abroad, essentially you're off the college team. So I thought, okay, well, maybe after I'm done playing in college, if I have opportunities to go pro, I can travel and then experience different cultures, travel the world, maybe live in Europe that way. So I can use football in a sense to travel as I try to take my career forward and play at the highest level I can. And so I kind of formed that plan near my freshman year of college to when I realized that I wouldn't really be able to do the study abroad like a lot of college people have the opportunity to do.
Was that like one of the first? I'm sure you had a lot of those moments growing up as a youth player, like kind of having to maybe give up certain social things, or there's certain sacrifices that you have to make when you want to be a high level player. But was that one of the first moments where you kind of realized like, I might not get to have the same experience that the normal student athlete gets to have?
Um, Yeah, it's true that you have to sacrifice a lot, especially weekends are everyone's free time, and every weekend you have a game, so you aren't nearly as free, and you got to spend the couple days before the game preparing. But I've spent a decent amount of, especially in my youth, my career with injuries, and when I wasn't able to play, when I wasn't able to train, and it was didn't have that structure to my day of training and kind of the physical activity. I was way less happy than when I did have the football, and the hole that it left in my life was definitely not worth the sacrifices that I made. So I always preferred to be
Mm.
sacrificing to keep playing the game. It was always definitely just better for me to be involved.
So if we take it back a little bit to kind of build this story here and set some of the groundwork, growing up in Seattle, Washington, how would you kind of like, or in that area, that Pacific Northwest area, how would you describe your youth career? What was it like, your experience playing the game growing up?
I guess I can start from the very beginning. I played rec as a youngster, like all do, and then I pretty quickly went to the premier levels. There was like an intermediate
Mhm.
city league, I think it was called, level that I skipped and went directly to premier, playing a couple years up. I think that was pretty helpful for my development because I think when you're playing with older kids and pushing yourself to the highest level you can, that it definitely helps push you forward. And from then, I stuck with one club for a long time called Seattle United. So I know a lot of people go the academy route, but I was always really content with my club team. We made a lot of long runs into national tournaments. We won the Dallas Cup. We never actually won nationals. I think we came second and third, but I was getting a lot of college exposure from it, and we were finding success. So I was always content there. The one thing I would say is that I think in academy, it is generally a higher level, and also you get the opportunity to train more often. So if you, I went the club route, and I was always happy with that. But sometimes I felt like on those days that I would have off, where maybe people playing academy would have extra training, you kind of had to replace those days with individual training if you could, just to keep working.
Yeah. And I haven't done hundreds and hundreds of these episodes, but I've done a fair few of these episodes. And to be honest, like, I think there's a high percentage of players that I've spoken to that originate from the Pacific Northwest. And I don't know if that's just a coincidence, or maybe you can speak to this better. Like, what is the talent pool like, or what is the competitive nature of football just like in that area of the country?
It's definitely good. I mean, I can speak to the Sounders, which I know is a strong academy and has a really strong fan base. So I think Seattle, especially, is the town that I'm from, and I know Portland a little farther south. They're both big, supportive soccer towns, soccer cities, and I think there's a big talent pool and a lot of people pushing to the next level and pushing to professional levels from that area in particular. I think the Pacific Northwest and also down the coast of California, both of them, I think both um, put a lot of players that take it to the next level.
Mm. So then, what factored into your decision to go down south a little bit farther and play in California? And when it came to college, can you walk us through a little bit your like recruiting process?
So I was getting some exposure from the national tournaments, and then I also did a lot of the ID camps. So a lot of colleges host ID camps. You got to go to the campus, and then usually a couple days kind of thing where they're able to see if they can. And I did a couple all over the country. Um, Pretty much, I was basing my college decision around where I had Division 1 offers. I knew I wanted to play Division 1. I knew I wanted to kind of push for that level. And then I had a couple who were interested, but Santa Clara made an offer and they said that they had a spot for me. And I kind of looked at the environment where I was at the time, and I knew I wanted to leave the state, but I didn't want to go too far from home. And I was kind of going away from the rain of Seattle to the sun of California, and everything just seemed to line up. So I jumped on it when I had the opportunity.
So did they also, that recruiting process, was it mostly, did it just stem from you going to that ID camp, or did they also come and watch you play a number of times as well? Like, kind of talk to me about, as a young player, how would you advise a player in terms of those ID camps? Because I know sometimes they can be a great fit for players, but also sometimes, I don't know, certain players can maybe feel like that it's not a real opportunity for them to be seen?
The advice that I was given was that it's very helpful for you to do a lot of the coach's work for them if you can. So you're really aggressive with sending out emails asking to watch you play. I made a highlight video from my youth that was strong and showed me scoring a lot of goals. So I had to record games for that and then clip the games and put it together. And if you can put yourself on the front foot with marketing yourself, it's extremely helpful for getting yourself recruited. So I was sending so many emails to all these coaches, and you're not going to get responses to all of them. Not all of them are going to come watch you, but it's a numbers game, and the more you can do for yourself, the more that the higher you raise your chances of getting properly scouted and getting an option. So I was making videos, sending them to coaches. I was letting them know when I had games, where I had games, what kind of high level tournaments I'd be playing in, where I'd be going, and just doing my best to market myself as a player to raise those chances for myself. And eventually it worked out. The ID camp, I think, was a big part because that was
Has that
after they were
that
already interested.
oh, sorry.
That was after they were already interested, so they'd come and seen some games and they wanted to kind of further evaluate. So I was already on their radar. And then when I went to the ID camp and performed, I did it 2 years in a row actually, my junior year or my sophomore and junior year, I believe. Then I went, and then I went again. I went back and performed both times, and then that kind of solidified things.
Has that has that marketing kind of background when it came to going into college, right? And finding a fit for you there. Is that kind of like the same blueprint that you use then when you go and tackle like the pro dream? Like, is it kind of just like, was that your first real run in with doing something like that? And now you're kind of applying the same principles to the pro dream?
It's a little bit less effective for pros, so it's pretty difficult at the professional level for players to reach out on their own and for that to operate in the same way. Video is still important. So the marketing it happens a little differently where you're kind of talking to third party agents because clubs want to rely on agents that they trust and agencies that they trust. So you get agents to represent you and hopefully work for you and get you trials and get you spots. So it's a little different in that you're not reaching out directly to coaches and marketing yourself. It's kind of there's an intermediary, but it still essentially operates the same way. And when I was in Sweden, I was doing a lot of going because my team didn't record our games, so I would go and ask every time. I would ask the other team, "Do you have any video? This is my email. Can you please send it to me?" And then I would clip the games myself and make the highlight video myself. So then I had footage to show if I wanted to market myself to agencies to go elsewhere going forward.
So then talk to me a little bit about your college career. Once you actually do wind up at Santa Clara, what was the first initial kind of adjustment period like? How would you maybe describe what your freshman year was like coming from that successful run where you're in Seattle and playing at a high level club wise to then, college where there's definitely a jump in that level of play?
It's a jump in the level of play, but it's the biggest jump I think is physical. So I was in kind of in the older like of my year of club soccer. I was one of the older ones, and I was always one of the biggest and usually one of the fastest players on the pitch. And going from that to being a freshman, where I'm 17 at the time because I was pretty young when I came in, and playing games against 23-year-olds, like I was physically not in the dominant position that I was before. So the first adjustment definitely is a physical one in terms of just strength, um, and then but then also fitness because of the subbing rules collegiately. The so much of the game in general is oriented around pressing that you essentially enter the game and you just sprint to press the ball and until you're exhausted, then you get subbed out and then you can go back in for another shift. That's how it works a lot of the time, especially in some positions. The back line might stay a little bit more constant, but in the midfield and attacking positions, there's a lot of rotation just because there's not a lot of substitution in there. So I think the most drastic adjustment was, I mean, there's always a speed of play adjustment when you jump a level, but the most drastic for sure was physical and just adjusting to the constant physicality of college soccer.
So what was your kind of plan to combat that? Was it to improve your technical ability to a way in which like your speed of play would outweigh the physicality, or was it to kind of improve your physicality as well to match what was the level that was around you?
It's both, and it's both, and it's also like there are almost non-technical related things that you do to improve your speed of play, like improving awareness. So working on body positioning and working on scanning so you know where you're going before you receive the ball, and just being way better about having your head on a swivel can help you improve that speed of play and not get crunched where you would have been crunched before if you were playing a little less aware. So it's a combination of
Mm.
becoming a lot cleaner at really simple things technically, improving physically, and then becoming more aware. And by being cleaner at simple things, it's improving that technical side of the game. Wasn't doing crazy tricks, doing 5-star skill moves. It was doing really simple things, taking your first touch with the correct foot in the correct direction, and passing it to the next player's correct foot facing the correct direction, and making the correct decision with that, and doing that simple technical piece of the game and doing it well every time, being really consistent at it. That was the technical jump. From if you make 2 mistakes out of 10, you have to go from making 0 mistakes out of 10, or those technical breakdowns cost you when the level jumps.
What was your experience with I guess that technical side of the game, right? Because when you understand those little details of the game, I feel as though some players maybe have like a disconnect with college soccer because they feel like the game maybe doesn't value those things as much at that, particular level. Whereas, as you mentioned, sometimes it does seem to be solely about the physicality of it and the ability to run up and down and things of that nature. Like, what was your kind of relationship with that in the college soccer game as a whole?
Um, it's really, I think it's system oriented. So it depends on a lot the position you're playing and then also the system that the coach is trying to implement. So if you're in a system where you're given freedom to create and be a little more free with the ball, then okay, you can go for it. But if you're in a system where you need to play really simply and really structured and really organized, and that's what the coach is going for, then it's following the system that finds success. And the times when we had success, I think, are when we were playing towards the system that was trying to be implemented, if that makes sense. But it also is positional. I usually was playing the eight, kind of the transitional center mid position, which meant that I didn't have a lot of time to be creative. My role was more distribution and being really simple with the ball and not losing it and rotating the ball from side to side, if that makes sense. So it depends on the position where you are, I think, for what kind of technical pieces the game values and that you can make a difference with it in the game.
So then how would you categorize your team's kind of success over the course of your career at Santa Clara, and maybe also speak to a little bit individually what you felt like you got out of your career as a player there?
For team success, I think it was pretty disappointing actually. We really just we wanted to make tournament and go on a tournament run, and the first couple of years didn't go so well. The second couple of years we got close to a tournament run, but we never quite made it. So that was always disappointing that we hadn't made tournament in my 4 years there. That was something I'd always wanted to do, but we never quite could get there. And it came down, I think, to closing out games and overtime moments. So as a team, we couldn't find that kind of final push in the 85th to 90th minute of a game, or when it was tied in the golden goal period of college soccer. I mean, it was finding that closing kind of killer instinct that we were just unable to do, and it was killing us for points in the season. So I think learning the value of it was a valuable lesson to learn the value of that, and to learn how many points that killer instinct can preserve for you in a season, or can win for you in a season. Personally, I think one of the biggest things I learned was in mentality, just because it's such a grind, especially with the NCAA rules. So in winter, you were only allowed, I think, when I was playing 2 hours on a ball a week or something, which meant we were just waking up every day and running for 45 minutes and then leaving, just straight wind sprints. So you have a third of your year where you're just waking up at, I don't know, 6:30, going to the gym and then sprinting every day, and it's decently cold in the morning, and just it's not particularly easy to wake up every day and know that you just have to go do wind sprints and then move on. And we would train with the ball after without the coaches on our own, just because you have to get some time on the ball. But I think just developing that mentality of I'm going to get up and do what is asked of me and do what is required of me every day, developing kind of an iron mentality was really valuable.
Did you feel like in college as a player with the aspirations and the goals that you maybe had, that because there was so little time in the off season where you were allowed to be on the ball, did you feel like you had to kind of go and do sessions on your own as well, or were you able to get most of the work that you needed out of what was provided in training and workouts and things like that?
No, you definitely needed more time on the ball. I mean, I think you need a pretty constant relationship to the ball. You need to feel comfortable with it at your feet. You need to feel like you're sharp and in tune with those the fundamentals, just first touch and passing on the ground, control, pass, receive, just simple dribbling. And I think when you take too much time away from the ball, especially in that off season, then you lose some of that sharpness. So a lot of the team would stay after and play small sided, stay after and do technical drills. And I think with how those rules function at the time, that was necessary. As I understand it, the rules have actually at this point changed. I think they changed my senior year, where there's more time on the ball now, which is definitely better. But I think at that time, when we simply weren't allowed as much time on the ball as we needed, yeah, you needed individual just to maintain kind of comfort with the ball.
Why don't we talk a little bit about PDL? I think that's not something that I've heard like a ton of players speak about what their experience was like. So what was your experience in the summer? Did you start right from your freshman year going into a PDL team or USL2, whatever it was called at the time or is now?
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I think it only started my sophomore year. Because my freshman year, my club, I was a year older than the rest of my club team, so I went to college first. And when I came back, they were still training. So I just said, "Hey, can I rejoin training?" And the coach said, "Sure." So I trained with them. I think when I was back for the summer. But then my sophomore year, I started playing PDL, and I mean, you need to stay fit in the summer, and playing games and training daily with the PDL team really is just the best way to do it. So there's definitely a reason for it. Um, my first PL experience wasn't great. I went to Florida and was with IMG Academy, and a lot of it was fine, but we were getting thunderstormed out of being able to train and play like 50% of the time, and that just made it not worth it. But other than that, it was okay. And then after that, I stayed a little closer to home playing for Sounders U23, and that was always great. High level, you stay fit, you get game time. It's just what you need.
Hmm. How would you compare the level that you would be seeing in the summer with the PDL teams to that of your college season?
It's pretty similar. I think we had mostly Division 1 players that would come and form the PDL teams usually, and I think a lot of times the level was quite similar to the Santa Clara team. I'd often wondered who'd win if they played, and I wasn't quite sure.
So then, after you have those experiences of your 4 years and playing also PDL in the summer, which I imagine gives you a little bit of that taste, kind of maybe what the professional kind of future could look like, as I imagine some of those players are looking to do the same thing one day after college. What's your
Mhm.
kind of approach, maybe going into your senior year or wrapping up your senior year? Like, how is pro soccer kind of fitting into your mindset at that point?
I was pretty focused on seeing college out without thinking about it until after the season was done. So the way it works is you have fall, which is your season first, and then 2 more quarters of school. And I knew I was also going to graduate. So until I was finished with our fall season, I hadn't thought about it too much. And then pretty much as soon as we stopped, I talked to the coaches and I said, I want to keep training with the team. And I know, technically I'm graduated and usually seniors stop playing after then. But I wanted to keep training through winter, through the running of winter and through spring. And I did to stay fit and stay sharp for trying to play professional after. And that was also when I started reaching out and seeing what people I could put in contact with, what contacts the coaches had, where kind of what options I had. And it was a little bit of an awkward time just because that was right at kind of the peak of COVID. So getting trials and getting visas were really delayed and almost impossible in a lot of cases. So I actually ended up having to wait a long time for a visa. But then as soon as I got one visa approved abroad my college coaches had put me in contact with one agent that knew a couple teams around and he said, "Yeah, I can get you a trial." I pretty much left immediately.
So how long was that time from maybe graduation to actually getting that opportunity to go out on that first trial, right? Was that a long period of time where you're kind of training on your own and waiting
Yeah, it was
for
long.
something to come up?
Yeah. It was long, but it was, no one was doing much during that time. That was when everyone was just sitting inside. So I think that was like the whole quarantine period of COVID, I think was around during then. And it was, I think, about 9 months between when I applied for the visa and when I got it. So that was, I guess, longer than the really bad period of quarantine. But I was waiting a while, and when teams weren't allowed to assemble, I was just training on my own and running on my own and doing what I could. But then as soon as teams were allowed to assemble again, I joined a local kind of PDL level team just to keep training and keep playing games when I could while I waited to be able to play for the Swedish team. And then as soon as my visa got approved, it was decent timing, I think. I joined, there's a mid-season break in the Swedish season, and I joined right after that mid-season break for the second half of the season.
And you might have already said it, but I might have missed it. Did you go and trial with the club first, or was there already a kind of a set agreement to come and join the team and a contract and all those things?
It was just a trial, but essentially what the agent said was, yeah, you should go and you should trial. I'm fairly confident that the trial is going to go well, and if it doesn't, we can instantly find you something else. So it was, I was reasonably assured, and I knew I trusted the agent. He was someone that my coaches had told me about. He had placed other players from our university program's history. So I was confident in that he could deliver on what he said he was going to, and then I went, and the trial did go well, and all was well.
Hmm.
So it was only a trial, and there was still definitely that element of uncertainty, and it's always a little worrying when maybe I go out and I don't actually stay, and I just have to bring all my stuff home again. But I was reasonably assured.
Hmm. So, like, what are your emotions kind of going into a trial like that? Obviously, you feel a little bit more confident given the feedback that the agent is setting up for you going into it. But any trial with a brand new club, especially one in a new country that you've never played in before, I'm sure has to have some nerves associated with that.
Mm. I'm not a very nerve nervous person, I guess, for trials and game type situations. I think before you think about it a lot, and kind of when you're in the locker room waiting for your first training. But as soon as you step on the field, for me, they always just disappear, and it's the same game that you've
Mm.
been playing for so many years, and you just fall into a rhythm again, and it becomes instinct and muscle memory. So in terms of nerves, as soon as you actually start training, for me, they just disappeared right away. The the more stressful part, honestly, is getting the trial. If I can get a trial, I'll always back
Mm.
myself, and I'm confident that I'll do well and that I can show for the coaches. And if I don't, then I feel like, okay, it was my own not performing that resulted in this. But it's actually getting to that point where you're able to be in a position to trial and show for coaches. That's the hard part. Okay.
What was that first season like? I know you were talking before about the adjustment to college, right? Where there was this kind of jump in physicality. So now when you're over in Sweden, you've had the successful trial, you've joined the club. Talk to me about some of the newer things that you were kind of adapting to. Maybe it could be culture wise, it could be football culture, whatever. What were some of the things that you were adapting to now when you're at this first club in Sweden?
I can talk about the football first because I don't think there's that much to say because the Swedish football really it was pretty similar. It's really physical. It's especially a lot of the grass surfaces were pretty soft, and so it became difficult to play kind of tiki taka soccer on it, and so it just was in a lot of ways similar to the kind of football and the physicality of college. So that adjustment wasn't that crazy. The one difference you have again is you're playing against people that are several years older than you again and often several years bigger. So there was a little bit of a physicality adjustment just because you're playing
Mm.
rather than young men, you're playing grown men and a lot of times they're bigger and more physical in that respect. The more difficult adjustment I think was probably the lifestyle and culture adjustment. So the town that I was in Sweden, that it was so small. It was about 500 people, I think, and very far north and often freezing. And there
Mm.
really wasn't a lot to focus on other than football, and then or soccer, and then if the soccer wasn't going great, that was kind of like the only reason you were there in that tiny town wasn't going great, and that was definitely frustrating. And the transit times to training was also really hard. It was an hour and a half to training and an hour and a half back. And I think my knees are even, now almost 6 months later from the last time I was with that club, they're still recovering from being cooped up in a car after training and after playing games because our transit to games was also ridiculous. Sometimes we would be driving 6 or 7 hours on game day and then 6 or 7 hours back. So the commute and the tiny town I was in, it was definitely those were the most difficult parts to adjust to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you spoke to something really important there that a lot of players experience. And I also notice it too, in particular with players in certain Scandinavian countries or other players who I've spoken to that have played in Iceland, right, where there's this kind of like small town mental or this small town atmosphere with a lot of the places where players find those opportunities, and it can be kind of difficult
Mm.
to feel like you don't really have a lot going on around you and a lot of culture around you, so it's like you only have really football as your one thing to go and do every day. And like I think you mentioned as well, sometimes when football is not going the best and then you also live in this tiny town and there's not much to do outside of football to kind of take your mind off of it, it can sometimes become like really challenging to still keep performing at a high level when things don't seem to be going perfectly for yourself on the pitch week in and week out. What was kind of the progression of that for you in your time in Sweden? Like, I'm sure in the beginning there's that excitement and you're just happy to be playing football, and everything is kind of good for the most part, right? And then where do things maybe start to become a little bit more challenging? Is it as the season progresses? Is it maybe as you have some results that you're not happy with, or the team has results that you're not happy with? What was kind of like the timeline of your season for you playing with that team in Sweden?
I'd say about halfway, so maybe 3 months into the first season I had with that team, I was pretty assured that okay, this was a good first step. I've got my foot in the door to European soccer, and I'm playing with a team here and playing at the pro level here. But I knew that I would want to be moving up or to another country or elsewhere. So I knew I'd taken the first step, but I wanted to take further steps. So I knew that pretty quickly. Um, and then I started after that season pretty quickly looking for other opportunities in Sweden. Um, you're definitely right that at the beginning it's exciting because you're there for the first time, and I was a 90-minute player, and I was content to be playing and performing in a lot of the games, and we were getting better results for the second half of the season, and we kind of came from a relegation position all the way up to seventh. And I was happy to be part of that run, happy that the team had achieved safety, but I still was pretty confident that I wanted to look elsewhere. And then I did end up getting a spot on a team in a nicer city, and the team looked like it was going to be in good shape, but it turned out to be there was like a lot of organizational disaster for the running of the team and the administration of the team that we didn't really know about. That was all kind of going on in the background, and eventually the team just broke apart before the season, and I ended up going back to the first team that I had been with because I was still officially registered with them.
Mm,
So, in terms of the route I took, I knew pretty quickly that I wanted to be moving elsewhere, and then I found what I thought was a good opportunity elsewhere that it turned out wasn't, and then I did half a season back in the Swedish team, and then immediately after that I came here to Portugal.
gotcha. What was the opportunity that kind of, like you mentioned, you thought was something and then turned out to actually be nothing? Because I think it would be important for some, especially any younger players out there listening, is
Yeah.
to understand kind of what that maybe is and understand the reality that does happen, in the game where players think that this is a great thing. Maybe they're being told one thing and the reality is actually something different,
Mm-hmm.
or an opportunity just isn't what it is cracked up to be. Like, what does that kind of look like for you in your situation?
I don't think I want to name names or even name the club specifically, but I will say that it was in a city that I quite liked. The facilities were great. The coach was great. I was happy with the teammates that I had. But essentially, what was happening is that the team had not managed their money the prior season well at all. And due to financial
Mm,
irregularities, they were given a transfer ban, and they were really had almost no funds at the beginning of the next season. But the sport director wasn't informing any of the players that, and so we were being given these contracts that gave these certain sums and then weren't receiving the money that was in the contracts. And eventually we kind of looked around and realized that no one was being paid, and that we simply couldn't stay. And when we spoke to the club about it, we realized, yeah, that it was just going to break apart. And I think the club ended up not having a season at all. And it's tough to know what lesson to draw out of that. I think that you can't always trust. It's a tough lesson, but I guess you can't always trust the opportunities that you have. And maybe we should have seen some of the warning signs, given that they had all these financial irregularities and restrictions and punishments given to them from this prior season. But it was hard because I felt like I'd found in so many ways a better spot than where I was, and I felt like the opportunity to advance from that team to a higher team was going to be better because I was in a better spot and because there was more exposure theoretically if we were going to play in the league that they were set to play in. And I liked the football environment a lot more. There was more consistent training. The commute to training wasn't as bad. I liked the city more. There was a lot that was better. But I think ultimately, if you, as a foreigner, if you're not receiving the money that's in your contract, you just can't stay. And that's pretty much what was happening.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. You mentioned that word of trust, right? And I think it's important because it's kind of like this balance, like I think you just spoke about a little bit, in that in football, especially kind of in the beginning of your career, like you have to put your trust in other people, whether it be agents or coaches, to try and get yourself to the next level. But sometimes, unfortunately, you can be burned, by a coach that, tells you one thing and then something different happens, or an agent that, doesn't necessarily have your best interests at heart. Like, how do you kind of describe what it's like to trust in football? Like, what are some of the things that you look for in, like, all right, this is, I think, an agent that's gonna do what's best for me in this situation? Or how do you kind of navigate the world of football, which can sometimes be kind of cruel and crazy, but in order to still get yourself to where you're trying to go with your career?
The best way is operating from a person you already trust. So all of the opportunities I've had that have went well came from me, a former teammate saying, "Yeah, this guy's legit. This guy can help you." So you research, or you operating based on already established contacts. So maybe that's my college coach is giving me a contact, old teammates giving me a contact, people that you already trust that can find you opportunities. For me, that's always been the best. Which isn't to say that your friends won't give you something that maybe ends up burning you, but I think in my case, it's that's been the path where I found success. And I think also maybe looking for those kind of red flags a little early can help. But what really happened was it was just one guy kind of single handedly bringing down the club in this instance, which was tough.
Yeah.
Um,
So
yeah, I don't know what else to say other than operate based on a contact that you already trust. I think is the best way to go.
yeah, I think that's really, really important advice, because I think you realize really quickly in football that you're kind of, as talented as you may be, you're kind of, I don't know if this is the perfect way of phrasing this, but you're kind of as valuable as your network is, right? Like, if you're an amazing player but you don't have the connections to get you where you need to go, then it sometimes doesn't quite matter how talented you are, right? You still need those people to help you, put you in positions. And so, like you said, when you have those teammates that can vouch for you and can vouch for the people that you're speaking to, that's a really invaluable thing to have when you're trying to build out a career. Is that the same way that the Portugal opportunity came about for you, through through a teammate or a contact or a friend that you'd already trusted that brought you over to Portugal?
Old university teammate saying, "Yes, this trainer is good, and he can definitely find you trials at the level that kind of you're looking for and where you'd want to play." And I said, "Okay," and it was pretty risky. I left Sweden and came to Portugal with no guaranteed contract, but I trusted the teammate, and so through extension, I trusted the kind of agent trainer that he put me in contact with, and it ended up working out. And again, that was in large part. It's due to if I was sure that I could get myself a trial, I always back myself to perform in the trial and be able to take things forward from there. So me being reasonably certain that I'd be able to get a trial was good enough for me to feel like I could take the risk and head to Portugal.
So can you speak to at all some of the differences then that maybe you noticed? I know you said Sweden was really similar to the college game, so it was kind of an easy transition football wise. I'm sure Portugal had some, some differences in the way in which they played and the way in which they kind of approach football.
Very different. I prefer, I think, the style of football a lot more here. It's a lot more positional and it's less pressing. It's more circulating the ball and a lot more passing oriented play, and it's better. It's prettier football. And for me, I think although I did find success in kind of the more physical side, and I found a way to thrive, I think in there in a lot of ways. I definitely do prefer this style, and I think if you talk to a lot of soccer players, they'll say the same. It also, I think, was helpful the kind of rigorous fitness training I'd gone through in both in Sweden and in university. I came here and I was one of the most fit guys and one of the guys that's most used to running and pushing myself to kind of those fitness and endurance levels, and that was really helpful. And I think it is it is one of the pieces of my game. I think that makes me a better asset even in this style.
So how would you describe kind of the levels that are present in Portugal with some of the different leagues and the divisions of those leagues? Kind of, and maybe speak a little bit to, if you can, kind of where your club is at, and what your experience has been like so far with your club and kind of playing at the level that you're at right now.
My club is fourth tier, I believe, but in a position where we have a pretty clear goal that we want to promote into the third tier. And there's definitely a big environmental difference, I think, between the past team where I was in Sweden, where the goal was essentially just can we survive, avoid relegation, and stay in this league,
Yeah.
and this club where you're looking to win every game and you're looking to promote, and it's really it's a lot more competitive to be a part of the team that's looking to win every game. I think it pushes you as a team and as a player a lot more, and it's better for your motivation, and it contributes to a more competitive and a better environment overall. So there are several tiers in Portugal. I don't actually know how far down it goes, but I know that we are in the fourth, looking to promote to the third, and that being part of that that goal is definitely a great one and a motivational one to be a part of.
So in the same way that when you were in Sweden, you kind of within the first few months, let's say, or maybe halfway through the season, kind of realized, all right, this is a good stepping stone for me. But I need to find a new opportunity, whether that be here or elsewhere. Is Portugal now kind of the opposite situation where you're in an environment where you're playing football that more suits you and that you more enjoy? You're part of a club that has, aspirational goals of going on to a higher level. Is this a bit more of a place where you feel like, all right, I kind of want to build something here in this club?
I think having the mentality where you want to settle and you say, okay, this is good enough. I think that's not a mentality I ever really want to have for myself as a footballer, or hopefully for the team where I am. And you always want to push for that next thing and push for the next level. That being said,
Hmm.
I think it was one step to get to Europe and play in Sweden. And I think it was another step forward to get to here. And I'm just looking to keep stepping forward, and be that at another club, or be, if this club picks promotion and moves up, that's another step forward. So I think definitely I'm
Hmm.
more content here, but in whatever form it might manifest, always looking to keep taking further steps forward, just because I'm always looking to push myself to the next level and never really being content with where you are. I think is a kind of how the way I approach the game.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely can resonate with that and understand that. My question is, and I'm curious because I think it was something that when in certain situations I was in as a player, I kind of struggled to strike the balance between those two things, right? Of one, I want to push on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
I want to keep making those steps, like you mentioned. I want to play at a higher level, play at a higher level, but also understanding that in order for me to do that, I need to be present and performing at a high level in the current spot that I am. So there was like kind of moments where I felt like because I was looking towards that next level, sometimes it took me out of the mindset of like performing here at the current level that I'm at. How do you feel like you kind of balance that of, showing up each and every day to training and games, knowing that you need to perform at a high level in order to actually afford yourself those opportunities later on down the road. But also kind of, in the back of your mind, just looking at other things if they start to pop up and present themselves to you.
I think the way I manage that is just thinking about it in terms of the length of a contract. So right now I'm on contract with this team, and then for me that means that for the duration of that contract, I'm fully committed to this team's objectives, to this team's goals, and to perform whatever role for this team that I can. That's gonna take us ideally to this promotion and to the places that we want to go. But then when that contract ends, I would be looking, okay, what steps can I take now? What's the biggest step I can take forward? And it very well might be that it's with this team again, and then I can keep looking to take us as high as we can go and further my career with this team and keep improving as a player with this team. But if there's another step that I feel like is taking myself further forward in my career, I can focus on maybe sign a contract with another team, for example, and then I'll be fully committed to that contract for that duration, if that makes sense. So it's once you've committed to a program, I think that's when I try to become fully focused on that commitment that you have made. But then when you're back in that kind of evaluation period, when you can look to see what other steps you can take, that's when you might think of going elsewhere. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. I think it's the right way to look at it because, like I said, I think that focus, like you mentioned, in the duration of that contract is really important because that's really going to be the key to unlocking whatever those next opportunities are. The
Mm-hmm.
better you perform at this level, the better kind of opportunities come waiting for
Right.
you at the end of this contract. And I know you mentioned that kind of you're looking to take those steps, right? But as you maybe look out a little bit broader into your career, are there anything that you kind of have set for yourself as goals of it'd be really nice to achieve this in my career, play at this level or play in this country, things of that nature? Or are you kind of just looking at it from a one step at
Mm-hmm.
a time? Let me just try and climb the ladder a little bit and climb the ladder a little bit more.
Definitely one step at a time. I'm just taking it a day at a time to keep up each opportunity as it comes and just keep pushing and see how high I can go, essentially, is the way I'm looking at it. And in the meantime, I'm traveling and living essentially for free in different places and experiencing the world in that way.
Yeah. And that was something that you mentioned, right kind of in the beginning of our episode today, that this was kind of maybe a way in which you could have football be a way for you to experience all these parts of the world and all these different cultures as well. What has that been like for you, meeting people from all around the globe, seeing different cities and having football kind of be your vehicle to be able to do that?
It's just cool. It's definitely worth it. Um, I'm also someone that likes learning languages, and so, I'm living with three Brazilians here, and I'm learning Portuguese rapidly, and I like doing that, and it's just exposure to different cultures and different ways of life and different cities in a way that you really can't get any other way than if you live there. You can visit, you can be a tourist in a place, but it's really different from actually living there. And I think that the cultural broadening I think that I've gotten from both Sweden and from Portugal is something that I'll take with me forever. And hopefully I'll be able to speak different languages by the end too. Although the language barrier is also a difficulty, communicating with teammates and coaches, especially on the field. So that's been hard, but it's also I think it's a positive to learn a different language.
What was the difference maybe in language barrier between Sweden and Portugal? Because I mean, I have to imagine in Sweden there was a lot more people who spoke English, so maybe that was a bit easier. But I'm sure you can attest to this a lot better than me.
Everyone spoke English in Sweden, and in fact, we had so many
Hmm.
foreigners on the team that practices were conducted in English, so there was almost no adjustment. And on top of that, almost no opportunity to immerse in Swedish and learn Swedish. So I learned very little. And then here, far fewer people speak English or speak it as fluently, which isn't a detriment in my opinion. I mean, I shouldn't expect them to speak English. I'm in Portugal, and it's forcing me to learn a language, which in my opinion is a good thing. And I'm learning quickly and can speak somewhat conversationally now after a few months. And the more I learn, the more it helps me on the field, and also the more helpful that will be towards being able to to maybe take further steps with other teams. Being able to communicate with teammates is obviously, and coaches is obviously important. So learning, I think, has been good. But it's definitely a lot harder to communicate here than it was in Sweden when everyone spoke English.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like you've been speaking about today. There's pros and cons to it all, and obviously, in a way, kind of Sweden can make it, a little bit more comfortable because so many people speak English, so you don't need to, push outside of your comfort zone too much. But and on the flip side of that, like I can see how Portugal is maybe a better experience in a way because of that immersive nature to it. You have to figure out how to speak the language in order to communicate, and it just makes you learn that much faster because you're using it so much more. Whereas, even if you were learning Swedish, you always know you can kind of just switch in and out of English really easily and have that to fall back on, where, in Portugal, it's probably not the same. There's probably, you don't have that fallback of, let's just talk English for a second so we can figure this out.
Yeah. There's a lot of Google Translate if you actually need it. Although that not like that helps you on the field if you have a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Sam, I appreciate you taking the time to share your story today. It was a really fun one to hear about. I don't want to keep you too long because I'm sure you've got training and stuff like that later this afternoon. But thank you so much for stepping in with us and for sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
That's going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you once again to Sam for stepping into the 11, sharing his story with all of you out there. I hope you guys gained some value from it. Thank you to all of you out there who have continued to listen, continued your support of the show. If you want to do that in some other ways, you can also follow the show on social media, Instagram and TikTok at In the 11 Pod. You can also join the show's Patreon page. That's Patreon. In the 11 patreon.com/In the 11 Pod. The description will also be below in the show notes and the description. I appreciate all of you guys' support, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.